and Prochazka are the exact same odds at DraftKings as Ian Garry and MVP. Now, there isn't a point there or a tie-in, but when I was at DraftKings prior to making this piece so I could bring you the odds, I couldn't help but notice that. And that is so wildly close. So let's back up, okay? Let's take Pereira, let's take Prochazka, let's take DraftKings, and let's rewind the tape to November of last year. The venue, Madison Square Garden. The stakes, World Championship. The class, 205 pounds. Prochazka was the favorite, and it was ever so slight. And one of the reasons that Prochazka got the nod is Alex Pereira was coming off of a win over Blachowicz that a lot of people thought he didn't win. And it was a great fight. What do you remember about it? Do you remember what a great fight it was? Do you remember how close it was? Do you remember Prochazka implementing some grappling? And all of us thinking, well, if he can get him down, he's going to keep him there. And then Pereira getting back up to his feet like he's done every other time somebody's got him down. I mean, it's one of these things. And then knocking him out, but he knocked him out in an exchange, which could have gone his way or against him. He was a little faster. I mean, this is, am I remembering it differently? Does anybody dispute that? Because now you got DraftKings looking at two guys doing the same thing that they've already done for the same scheduled time limit under the same rules of the same weight class. And yes, they are favoring Pereira, but it is ever so slight. Minus 120 to plus 110. I mean, it is ever so slight. So, anytime you're going into a rematch, you have to ask yourself a question, particularly if you're a handicapper, right? If you're going to go part with your money, you're going to ask yourself a question, what is going to be different? Or what should have been different the first time? Like if you're resisting the outcome, if you're saying, no, Prochazka's got it, man. Prochazka even showed that he's better than him. Okay, fair enough. What is it that bit Prochazka in the ass? Was it just the punch? Are you sure of that? Or was he starting to slow down? Was the tide starting to turn? Was it just a bad position? Did he get careless? Should have he returned to the grappling? And these are all fair questions. There is one of the truest things I've heard about sport. And Mark Schultz had made this statement in the 80s. And I saw it in the early 90s, and I've never forgot it, which is it's always okay to read what they say about you. It's never okay to believe it. And in today's world of social media, you would automatically think I'm talking about the negative, right? Like, don't go get down and get depressed and get sad because somebody tried to hurt your feelings online. When Mark said it, social media didn't exist, and he was actually referencing the opposite. Mark was the Olympic champion and he was the world champion, and he was actually referencing it's okay to read all of the praise that people give, but don't believe it. If you start thinking you're as good as what you're reading, that's where the problems come. And Pereira is a very special human. He's a very special athlete, but he's still an athlete and he's still a human. And Pereira's willingness, like I've seen this wheel go around so many times where you start to think and you start to get invisible. Certain guys are. He could be that exception. But the awesome and the welcomed attitude that Pereira has, we still also have to look at it and go, okay, but you understand you're in a dogfight. You're in a dogfight as the favorite ever so slight at DraftKings against a guy who has familiarity with you. Like the mask is off. Your power and any fears that Prochazka once had, he now no longer has. It doesn't mean he doesn't respect them, but he now doesn't fear them. There's certain athletes that'll shut you down in the locker room, and they only come around ever so often. Anderson Silva had that in the sport of MMA. Mike Tyson had that in the sport of boxing. But you didn't very many times see if Anderson was better than his opponent or if Mike Tyson was a better boxer than his opponent, because you never saw them fight and or box. You never saw the opponent really bring their skills. They left them in the back, and they were just looking for the right opportunity to get out but make it look like it was competitive, right? I mean, there's certain athletes that have this kind of fear. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say the mask is off. If you've ever sparred with a guy, he no longer has that mask. He no longer has that allure. Coach Clayton would call it the Medusa, where he stares at you, he's going to turn you to stone. You're going to freeze. Even if it's for a millisecond. In this, if you freeze and stop, boom, boom, it's too long. Millisecond's too long. And Prochazka has a lot of that same allure. Like, Prochazka is a very weird, very difficult to train for. When I say weird, by the way, unique. Interchange those two words. You're not going to get a sparring partner that looks like him. You're not going to get angles, and you're not going to get positions, and you're not going to get this careless style that will go absolutely anywhere with anybody. Like, you don't get that very often. That was the superpower of Verdum, by the way. Verdum, who pulled one of the biggest upsets over Fedor. Verdum, who pulled one of the biggest upsets over Cain Velasquez. Like, the big thing about Verdum wasn't that his jiu-jitsu or that he had good kickboxing. It was that he genuinely did not care if it was on the feet or on the ground. He would be as reckless. He'd hit spinning wheel kicks on his feet. He'd just daring someone to take him down. Couldn't care less. And you have guys that will say that, but it's seldom that you have a guy that really means it. Like, that's just part of his game plan, wherever this goes. And that was the problem with Verdum. There wasn't somebody you could take him that he was uncomfortable. And it's the problem with Prochazka. So when I talk about the mask is off, or I talk about the Medusa, or I talk about freezing your opponent, I'm not convinced that Pereira has a meaningful advantage. Like, there are things that Pereira brings to the table unlike anybody else that's done this sport. That's true. World championship in 2 different divisions, looking to go to heavyweight and challenge for a world championship when you've only had 10 fights. I mean, there's just things about him that just, you've never seen it before. But there's things within the style of Prochazka that when you have somebody like Pereira that is so willing, says he was so anyone, anytime, short notice, this weight class, but he knows fully what he's getting into. See, that's the difference. Pereira knows fully what he's getting into with Prochazka. He knows full well that's a guy to avoid. That's a guy, put him in your rear view. Don't revisit that. And without hesitation, Pereira is going to revisit that. And it's very interesting. 7 minutes and 35 seconds ago, I asked you guys a question, which was about their first fight. What do you remember and how did you see it? I would love to know what Pereira remembers and how he sees it. I would love to know why what I thought was a very back and forth battle that ultimately went your way with a good punch. But the whole fight wasn't going. There was moments, in fact, that were quite the opposite. Why was there no hesitation? Where was the fear or the lack of respect, if you wanted to say it that way? Fear and respect is a very fine line. Hard fight. Pereira versus Prochazka, Part 2. What did you learn from Fight 1? What do you think they learned from Fight 1? Who do you think has the motivation? Is there any reason that we think this outcome should be different? Is DraftKings wrong to have the line this razor thin? I'm going to give you my prediction. Some of you will know as the curse. Later in the week, right now, comment section, let's go back and forth, but I want to hear, who do you give the nod to? Pereira or Prochazka?